You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 161 for April 10th, 2019. Bill Auchter is your host today. He recorded some interviews at the 2019 Mid-Atlantic Conference to highlight the people and archaeology of that region. So get ready to learn about the East Coast because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now.
Hello, this is Bill Auchter, East Coast Bill, and I am here in Ocean City, Maryland at the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, 49th annual one of that, and I'm currently in the book room. What you're going to hear next is hopefully a series of interviews that I'm conducting with some Mid-Atlantic archaeologists to get a better feel for what is done here in the Mid-Atlantic, the area between New York and Virginia. And sort of the unique things about archaeology in this area, and a lot of things that are going to be common to most folks who do archaeology in North America and even around the world. So listen, and I hope you enjoy. Hello, I'm here with at the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, and I'm here with Dr. Bernard Means of the Virtual Curation Laboratory at Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. Means is a previous guest on the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Welcome back, Dr. Means.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, Dr. Means. So I want to ask you a couple questions, sort of about yourself and also about Mid-Atlantic archaeology. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a teacher. Well, I'm a university professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, as we've already said. I was born in what was then West Germany. I'm an Army brat. Traveled around the world a bit as a kid. Came to the U.S. In my last year in high school. Went to college to become an astronaut. That didn't work out quite the way I thought. But I took some anthropology classes and got sort of interested. I had a really good undergraduate professor who taught me about archaeology. And then when I went to graduate school, I decided that archaeology is what I wanted to do.
Okay. Sort of to follow up on that, so what made archaeology sort of that bug that sort of caught you when you sort of had those other interests?
This is somewhat stereotypical, but I remember watching Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that sounded kind of interesting to me. And so when I got into graduate school, I actually was sort of kind of between going into cultural anthropology and going into archaeology, and I decided to go into archaeology. Partly because of the romance of dealing with the past.
Okay, cool. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the work you do at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University?
Sure. So my primary job is to teach undergraduate students about archaeology and anthropology in general. I also run the Virtual Curation Laboratory, where we are focusing on working mostly with other facilities, helping them with 3D scanning and 3D printing needs. We do a lot of course, archaeology, but we also do some work with historic sites and increasingly working with paleontologists with their collections as well.
That is cool. And if you get a chance, follow them on Instagram, and you'll see some of the great 3D scans that they have on there. So, Dr. Means, what in the world of archaeology, what are some of the things you would like to see changed?
I would like to see more funding. I think we all would. I would like to see more people engaged with and understand why archaeology is important. And this includes not only sort of the general public, but I think even also university administrators or people who run museums seem to think that they can get away without not having archaeologists on their staff. And so I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see more sort of embracing of archaeology, not only by the aforementioned professionals, but also by anthropologists, which I think are less welcoming of archaeologists than they should be.
Yeah, kind of the four-field thing is not always a true cohesive four fields.
I definitely agree with that. In fact, I know a university where archaeology is not considered part of anthropology, specifically at that university. So there's too few of us in anthropology and archaeology that we shouldn't all just get along and help each other.
Very true, very true. Now let's flip it to the other side now. So let's look positively at things. So what are some of the things that make you hopeful about the future of archaeology, both in the United States and sort of around the world?
One of the things I really like, at least, and this is sort of very local, being here at the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, is seeing the number of students who are actually engaged, who want to be professionals and working with professionals, and who themselves actually have a professional demeanor. I don't think I acted quite as professionally as they are at their age. So I find that particularly hopeful. Around the world, I do some international collaboration, and I think we're seeing a bit more of that. And certainly from the perspective of the United States, I think it's, how do I want to say this? People are recognizing that there are other voices out there. So it's no longer simply white archaeologists going to a foreign country and doing archaeology. There's real collaboration going on. There's real projects that are being directed by people in other countries. And I think that's a really positive sign. Not to say that those projects weren't there before, but these international collaborations are actually true collaborations.
Okay. Now let's sort of bring it back to home. By home, I mean here in the Middle Atlantic. And so what are the kind of some things that you think make the Middle Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic archaeology specifically sort of unique from other regions of the country?
Well, the two regions I've worked in primarily are in the American Southwest and the Mid-Atlantic region. And one of the things about the Mid-Atlantic region is the diversity not only of archaeologies, both native and then post-European contact, but also the diversity of sort of political entities. Several states are very close to each other. They all have their sort of unique archaeological traditions. And the Mid-Atlantic is an interesting sort of blend of all these different histories and traditions of archaeology.
Okay, thank you. And actually, one last thing to sort of conclude our argument. I believe you are now the president or president-elect of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference.
I am the president-elect of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, so I'm finishing up my first year, and then I'll become president in one more year. And I wanted to be president-elect of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference because I really think we need to sort of move forward and make sure we engage with more younger archaeologists. It's one of the sort of problems that a lot of state societies in the Mid-Atlantic region, and I'm sure elsewhere, are seeing, is that a lot of their members are graying. And if we don't bring in new people, we're not going to have a vital field going into the future. And that makes a difference not only for the people doing archaeology, but it makes a difference for preserving our heritage. If there aren't people to study it, how are we going to know that it's important to save and preserve and make available for their children's children?
Okay. Well, Dr. Means, thank you for your time, and we hope to hear you again at some point on a future episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm back. I'm here now with Jack Bernacki, a retired government contractor who has been a 48-year member of the Middle Atlantic Archaeology Conference. Mr. Bernacki, thank you for joining us.
Well, glad to be here. I am the number 2 senior member of the Middle Atlantic. I did not attend the first session, which was held at American University. I attended the second session, which was held out at the Thunderbird session, and I have made every one since. So I got 48 of them in a row. And I have published numerous articles in the MAAC journal and been a strong supporter of it.
Well, it definitely sounds like you have a large institutional knowledge of this organization. So how did you get into archaeology?
You would, in my younger days, I didn't admit this, and in my older age, I'll admit it. I was into cowboys and Indians when I was a kid, and guess who played the Indians in my neighborhood? I did, and it's been the love of the Native Americans ever since, and everything I can learn about them, contribute to their understanding, their knowledge, and their history, I will work right towards that.
Okay. And I guess that may sort of go into sort of the next question of like, why is this thing so central to you? You kind of answered that a little bit about your passion towards Native American peoples. But is there anything else as sort of why you're really into archaeology?
It's a love of history. And it's a friend of mine, Floyd Painter, he's dead, but he told me many, many years ago, he said what he loved about archaeology, there was always something new to find. And that's exactly the truth. You don't know what you're going to find tomorrow, so you got to go out and look for it.
Very, very true. So you've obviously have seen archaeology for a long time. What would be like one thing you would like to see changed in the current world of archaeology or CRM archaeology?
That is a wide open question, and I don't know really how to answer it because, of course, I'm not a change agent. I like the idea of this conference has a good number of young people here, which means I've been talking to them. They're various universities, Indiana University. I was kidding him in Pennsylvania. Their enthusiasm for what they're going to do. They've got a long career of this, and I hope they'll all make a contribution. And so archaeology is ongoing, and as I already said, there's always something new to find.
Very, very much so. So would it just be seeing young people here that sort of makes you hopeful about the future of archaeology, or is there anything else that that makes you hopeful with archaeology and what's currently going on?
Well, the archaeology has expanded tremendously. I mean, there was a time when I first got in it, I knew all the archaeologists working on the Atlantic coast. Now I don't even know all the archaeologists working in my county. It's expanded so, and it gets too hard for the general public to find out what archaeologists are doing. So a lot of it is just mundane salvage reports, and that's the end of it. And the public really doesn't know exactly what is going on out there. And I think you need more of that access, getting it out to the public, general public.
Yeah, no, very much so. There's a lot of gray literature out there with a lot of reports that never get to see the light of day for the public. Now, to sort of conclude this thing here, and, with your sort of storied history, and I'm looking out here at all the books you have on this table here in the book room, what is it about Middle Atlantic archaeology that you find so unique? It can be what it is about Virginia, because it seems to be Virginia is your focus and concentration. So, if you want to go into sort of a quick summary of all this volume of work you've done in terms of what it is about Virginia and Middle Atlantic archaeology that makes it so unique.
I don't have to use mine for Middle Atlantic. A sea captain found a bipoint about 10, 12 years ago. My memory fails me on when, called the Sinmar bipoint, and it was found with a mastodon tusk, which the Smithsonian was able to date at 22,000. That makes the Middle Atlantic the oldest dated context on the Atlantic coast. And that's what makes Middle Atlantic archaeology so important, because there's more and more of that. We just simply got to go find it.
Oh, you're right about that. Yeah, one piece is found, but it's always built upon more data, and that's what we're out here trying to do, is try to find more data to support ideas like that. So once again, Mr. Vernacki, thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us here on the CRM Archaeology Podcast.
As they say, my pleasure, sir.
Hello, I'm back. I'm in the book room, and now I am in front of the table for the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference Student Committee. And with me now, I have 4 members of the Student Committee. Could you please introduce yourselves and what schools you're affiliated with?
I'm Sarah Grady, and I'm the current student chair of the Student Committee, and I am from the University of Maryland.
I'm Ingrid Morgan-Gavin. I study at UAlbany doing my PhD, and I am the graduate representative of the Student Committee.
Hi, I'm Katie Boyle. I am from University of Maryland. I just graduated with my master's, and I'm the incoming student chair.
Hi, I'm Samantha Lee. I'm the event organizer-elect for the Middle Atlantic Archaeological Conference Student Committee, and I am a second-year PhD student at the University of Maryland.
Cool. So we got a wide range here, graduates and PhD students, or master's and PhD students, I should say. So does anyone want to talk a little bit about the work they're currently doing? Either with the committee itself or your own individual research?
So my dissertation is about the archaeology of enslaved children in America. So this morning I gave a talk that was slightly related but a little bit different that I actually accidentally stumbled upon in my research. It was an account book from 1804, and the owner of the account book, John Taylor III, his great-grandchildren actually used the account book for scratch paper 60 years later. So I discussed children's doodles and the lack of representation of children in both the archival and archaeological record.
That's very cool, very fascinating. Thank you.
So I got my master's from Maryland in May of last year, so I do a whole bunch of different things. I do CRM work. I also teach as an adjunct professor at Howard Community College. I've taught at the University of Maryland last fall, and then I'm a volunteer with the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center.
Very cool.
I'm working on my dissertation, which will be examining the use of Norman skilled chert in the Hudson Valley during the late and terminal Archaic. I'll be applying a nano indentation and Fourier transform infrared on geological samples of the chert and kind of bridging the gap between the artifacts and the geological samples using FTIR. Hopefully I'll be getting some results on that later this year.
Okay, cool. You're still in process, but it sounds very interesting.
So I've been involved with a lot. I graduated back in December with a dual master's in applied anthropology and historic preservation. I'm working with the National Park Service on 2 different contracts, so I get to dabble with GIS and also with museum collections, and I get to do some field work. I was involved with a project in Baltimore most recently, and we were working in West Baltimore on a really, really neat old house that I'm going to be presenting on Sunday here, and just the archaeology of that and what it can tell us about Baltimore today. So a little bit of everything.
Very cool. I live outside of Baltimore, so that sounds very, very interesting and cool. So let's change the pace a little bit here. So in your studies, in your years of experience, what is one thing, if you can think of one thing that you may want to see change in the world of archaeology?
So I've seen this more and more over the years, but more public engagement happening and actually reaching out to the communities where you're working, which I've seen it happening more now. But it's important to talk to these local communities and not just go to conferences and talk about your research.
Very much so. Public engagement's very, very important. Okay. And sort of go to the opposite side of that, or the flip side. What is something that makes you hopeful? Something that you're seeing in the world of archaeology, and it looks like it's going in the right direction, and you're hopeful that it's really going to help things, change things.
Well, this is just an example, but in Quebec right now there is definitely an effort going on to improve working conditions and improve salaries for our trusty shovel bums. Hopefully that'll lead to some greater gains, at least in terms of permanent employment. But it's getting me hopeful a bit.
Good. I mean, that is definitely a concern of many of the listeners here in the CRM Archaeology Podcast, the rate for field techs or lack of rate and things like that. So let's now sort of shift gears now to the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Student Committee here. So what exactly does the committee do?
So the student committee was probably started a few years ago, and so it's more to reach out to students, get students more involved in the professional aspect before they graduate, especially in undergrad, to get them engaged more in what professional archaeologists are doing.
Okay. And I see we're recording this interview on Friday, and I see that we have an event going on this afternoon.
Yeah, we have the Archaeology Olympics this afternoon. We're going to be doing artifact bingo, archaeology Jeopardy, and speed mending. So we're going to have some broken vessels that you got to mend really quickly. And there's a shot at some prizes. There's 3D printed artifact or 3D printed trophies for the top prizes, and there might be candy involved. It's a lot of fun. It's a really good bonding experience, and it gets people involved. It gets them to meet each other. And we're the future of archaeology, so it's kind of good to have that networking and team building kind of stuff too.
Very much so. It makes me want to do the old man. I wish I had this when I was in grad school. So, thank you all for your time. I know we're here in a busy book room and people keep running by the table and so forth like that. But if we have students in the Mid-Atlantic region who are interested and maybe, didn't know about the MAAC student committee or didn't realize that they too could also become a member of this, what's a good way for the interested students to reach out to you?
We have a Facebook page. It's the Mid-Atlantic Archaeological Conference Student Committee. If you just search that on Facebook, we'll pop up. And we're very responsive. We actually have someone who's a social media representative that deals with all the social media stuff, and they'll respond within a few hours.
That's very good. That's very important because there's a lot of professional archaeologists and professional archaeology companies who could use an actual dedicated social media person. We know who they are. You're probably not listening to a podcast, but shame on you. So yes, thank you for doing all that kind of stuff. So with that, I am now going to go find my next interview subjects.
Hey everybody, Chris Webster here, jumping in to talk about the membership system for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We've got a number of members that are at 3 different levels, and honestly, membership is just for people that want to support us. You can always get our podcast for free, but if you want to kick in a little bit extra each month, I know funds are always tight, but for as little as $5 a month, or I think it's $42 a year if you get it for the full plan, and trust me, that really helps out, because if, 500 of you listeners, and I know there's 5,000 of you, but if 500 of you even kicked in $5 a month, that would dramatically change everything we're able to do here. So head on over to arcpodnet.com/members. If you get any value out of this episode or any other episode, please just try to kick in a little bit. And you can also just give us a donation of $5 if you want. I don't care. Any little bit helps. So arcpodnet.com/members. Now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference here in Ocean City, Maryland. My voice is a little strained today from all the conversations in the hotel bar after the events last night, but I am soldiering on and will give you guys more interviews from day 2 of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference. Hello, welcome back, and I am with another returning guest of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, Dr. Alexandria Jones, founder of Archaeology in the Community, based out of Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Dr. Jones.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also here with one of the volunteer staff who is a CRM professional, Thomas Cuthburn. Welcome.
How you doing?
Okay. So we got a couple questions here just to let our listeners know about, what is, your work and what is Archaeology in the Community. So if you can tell you a little bit about yourself and also sort of the founding of Archaeology in the Community.
So Archaeology in the Community is a Mid-Atlantic-based archaeology education company. We have 3 programmatic tiers. Our largest is youth education around archaeology. Our second was professional development, where we work with graduate students, college students, and budding new professionals who are looking to get into community archaeology. And we also train classroom teachers. Our last is community programs, and these are our overarching kind of one-off programs that we have with guest lectures, speakers, and then our festival that we host every year.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like you're very, very, very thorough. There's a lot of things going on with that, and that's a great outreach going there. So why archaeology? Why is archaeology the focus for this sort of outreach effort of yours?
We use archaeology as a method, it being a science, to teach kids not only about the environment and the world that we live in, but how we're interconnected with it. So archaeology tends to be that perfect vehicle to do that. We are constantly talking about ourselves, how we develop, how we grow, how we change, and then we apply it to material culture, history, and heritage. And by bringing all those together, archaeology tends to be the glue, which we use to teach that and kind of get all those important lessons about respect and heritage and people and culture across to everyone.
There's also no other field that is as interdisciplinary as archaeology to approach all of these subjects all at one time. So having to look at geology and history and chemistry and whatever else we can find to throw into a lesson is really helpful in trying to teach kids how to use critical thinking and have that skill set.
Cool. Very, very good. Now, since you are sort of like at sort of the crossroads between professional archaeology, academic archaeology, and the public on there, well, with that, and it's a frequent topic on the podcast is sort of the problem of public communications. How do we communicate back and forth? Is there anything that you see in the world of archaeology that could be better to sort of communicate our message and so forth to a greater public?
Remember our humanity. I think that's one thing that we forget is that we're people. And just like everyone else, we have things that we love, that we're interested in, that we get excited about. Using that passion and that energy to convey and to look at what we do, but also using it when we're dealing with the public. Think about what are people going through, what are people experiencing, and how does that relate to the topics and the things that we're talking about.
The way that we do the public outreach, I think personally, if we're looking for change, we just start talking to not archaeologists. Where our archaeologists tend to be very insular, and we need to break out from that. And as much as we do, the Archaeology Podcast Network and blogs and outreach programs, we're doing a lot of things that are only reaching people who are already interested in archaeology. And programs like the Day of Archaeology we start actually reaching out into the community for people who would not necessarily otherwise be exposed to this stuff.
Okay. Now, to sort of give it the other view on this, what is it currently in archaeology that makes you hopeful about its future?
So our biggest focus is kids. And I would say for me, it's the kids. I mean, it's their excitement at the end of a class. It's the hugs that we get. It's them running to their parents, telling their parents what they learned and trying to teach their parents what they just learned. That's what makes me hopeful about our future, and that's what gives me hope that we will end up being sustainable and that we can continue through and that we are creating a new generation of stewards who are actually vested and want to see the continuation and the thriving of archaeology.
All right, thanks. I know that's very uplifting. Children are our future type of thing. So sort of the last sort of go-home question on this. We are here at the Middle Atlantic Archaeology Conference. What is it about the Middle Atlantic that's sort of unique in sort of the world of archaeology? Because a lot of our listeners are maybe have never been to the Mid-Atlantic or have never done archaeology here. So what are some of the things that make this area unique?
I think what makes the Mid-Atlantic region so unique is there's so much history and heritage here, and by default, there's so much archaeology here. So it gives us a plethora of sites, a plethora of experts, a huge amount of information to kind of pull from and to use to engage the public, and I think that's what makes it amazing. There's also a huge amount of diversity in this area in which we can look at different cultures, different time periods, so I think that's what makes us special and me excited to work in this area.
And it is one of those, the region itself is kind of interesting just because it has been, since the early colonial period, just a nexus of trade, of people, of everything coming in and out from anywhere you can think of. Maybe not as much as the Caribbean, but also it's been as sustainable and well developed and redeveloped and reoccupied and unoccupied and reoccupied again. So it's always just really interesting to see things like site reuse and things like who's trading with who, where, and where are they getting their stuff from. And it's always it keeps you on your toes when you're doing archaeology in the area.
Okay. Now, finally, as a nonprofit organization, you rely upon the support of volunteers and funders. So, if any of our listeners were interested in volunteering their time, volunteering money and other resources, or just wanted to get more information about archaeology in the community to maybe try to maybe replicate something like that in different areas of the country, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So I'd like to highlight we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this month. So we're very excited about that. If you go directly to www.archaeologyncommunity.com, as soon as you click on the page, you'll see our 10-year anniversary drive. We're trying to raise money to keep all of our programs free for kids. But in addition to that, we love your support. We love you as a volunteer. So if you're interested in volunteering, there is a link for more opportunities in the organization that you can click and become a volunteer. We do have a page with all of the volunteer opportunities. And if you're an archaeologist, we have stuff for even archaeologists who are not located in the Mid-Atlantic region, where you too can also participate in AITC. So please visit that site. It's www.archaeologyncommunity.com.
Dr. Jones, Tom, thank you very much for your time. And now I have the pleasure of sitting down here with Dr. Ruth Tricoli, city archaeologist for Washington, D.C. Welcome, Dr. Tricoli.
Hi, Bill. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So we're going to start off with some general questions, some more about yourself, but also about your role as city archaeologist for D.C. So if you could, briefly tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I went to Rutgers University, Douglas College, so I got my start in Middle Atlantic archaeology right from undergrad. And I like to say that I graduated and started doing CRM fieldwork right out of college. I did nothing but phase 3s for about 2 years. I didn't even know how to dig a shovel test because it was just mitigation after mitigation. It was really amazing. I worked on Wall Street in Manhattan twice. The Abbott Farm National Historic Landmark, prehistoric sites, mitigations for months out there right out of college. It was really an amazing experience, really formative for me. It was the basis pretty much of everything that I went on to do afterwards. And it was just really a wonderful experience.
That's very cool, very fascinating. That's a privilege to be able to get that sort of experience that early in your career. So, if you could tell me a little bit about your work in DC and maybe some of the maybe an interesting project or two from your, I know of so many to choose from. Maybe a selection of one or two.
One of the interesting things about Washington, D.C. is people don't realize really great and amazing archaeology there. And we were writing postcards earlier for archaeology in the community, and people wanted, the children wanted to know, do you travel a lot for archaeology? And I have to say, no, I don't need to, because we really have cool archaeology in Washington, D.C. And it's partly because of the history and the nation's capital, but it's much deeper than that and broader in time. So it's located at the fall line where the coastal plain meets the Piedmont. And those kinds of junctions in space are locations where people come together, and they're a magnet. They're a central place, really, on the landscape where you get different resources, plant and animals, and stone tool materials, for example, for Native American sites. And all these different things come together in one place, so it's a wonderful place for people to live, whether it was prehistoric or colonial or historic. And that's why Washington, D.C. is where it is today. So the archaeology spans all those different time periods I just mentioned. And so it's a really deep, rich history.
Very much so. As an aside confession, I've done some work in D.C. myself, and yes, I've absolutely seen the richness that can come from out of the District of Columbia. So next, so why archaeology? What is it about archaeology that makes it the thing you're still doing right now?
I love the thrill of the chase. The research, finding research questions identifying research questions and then finding data to answer those questions. It's so much fun. And I first got interested in archaeology as a child.
So with that, with your years' experience in archaeology and sort of being a very crucial tangential player to the world of cultural resource management, as being the state archaeologist for the District of Columbia, because District of Columbia should be a state by this point. What are some of the things you'd like to see change with both either in archaeology or specifically in the world of CRM?
I'd like people to place more emphasis on actually correctly analyzing the collections and getting them ready for curation. That's always seems to be it's the last thing that gets done in a project, and the money spent earlier on. You need to get the field work done to get a report written. And so the collections always see short shrift. And so as part of my job, I'm also the curator, and it can be really difficult. There's no money to finish actually processing a collection, and so we've actually accessioned incompletely processed collections and then had to rally the interns and volunteers to finish like tagging and bagging and analyzing, and that's just not how it should be. It's just the reality of fieldwork today, and it just shouldn't be that way. People aren't spending as much money on projects as they should be.
Yeah, yes, very much so. Again, it sort of defeats the sort of future scientific analysis of these things. I mean, here at the MAAC conference, I've seen so many papers where there's a master's student or a PhD student who's gone back through a previous collection or previous collections on a site that have taken place over decades and are using that data. But if we're not recording the data correctly the first time, it makes it really impossible with that. So, yeah, thank you for that.
So I'd like to remind people that there are wonderful collections out there in facilities that need analysis that were never reported. And we've seen a number of those papers here at this conference, and I've heard people actually say, take on this project. It would be a great master's thesis, and it's here waiting for you.
So a word to everyone out there who's thinking about going to grad school: you don't have to excavate to get your master's degree. You can process and work existing collections. So with that, and thinking future and thinking forward on that, what would be something that makes you hopeful about the future of archaeology?
The students that are coming through right now, undergrads that are here at a conference giving posters and papers. I didn't have that opportunity. The future of archaeology is in those people coming on up now, and I just think it looks really bright.
Yes, I mean, very much so. I mean, you can hear that commenting on there, and the MAAC is with the presence, as my previous interview with the student committee sort of showed. There is definitely an effort here in the Mid-Atlantic and with MAAC specifically to sort of help nurture the next generation of archaeologists, and seeing their papers and their presentations is a very much thing making us hopeful about the future for us. So to sort of wrap things up with this, we are at the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference, so we are concentrating on sort of the areas surrounding the Chesapeake Bay. What are some of the things about this region, or as the city archaeologist for D.C., the District of Columbia? I know we talked about it a little before, but what also maybe expanded about the Middle Atlantic that makes this area so unique? And everybody's a sport of a special little snowflake. No offense to the Southwest people out there, but Middle Atlantic is its own special little snowflake. So what are the kind of things that makes this so unique?
Well, it's a small region space-wise, and so there's a lot of collegiality among archaeologists where we all communicate and we know what's going on. And then you're right, the Chesapeake runs through it, and then on the backside we have the Appalachians, on the spine. And so while we have all these subregions, we're linked by those two things. And I think that's really important in terms of the material culture, if you're talking Native American, and people moving north and south by water, by land, and then east-west, we get some really cool movement of people and objects from, for example, the Hopewellian cultures, where we've got high-style, full-blown Hopewell on the Chesapeake Bay on both sides, and there were east-west trails, evidently. Not all of them have been identified. So there's still a lot of work out there, and that's what's kind of cool. We haven't solved everything yet. There are still big mysteries to be solved in terms of people and movement and cultural contact and all kinds of things going on.
Yes, very much so. That's one of the reasons I'm sort of doing all these interviews here is I want to let the rest of the country, the rest of North America, the rest of the world know about sort of the great work that is happening here in the Middle Atlantic. Dr. Crowley, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and we hope to maybe someday have you back on as a guest for the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Hey everyone, Chris Webster jumping in one last time to talk to you about WildNote. I'm actually on a survey project right now. I'm recording this from Yuma, Arizona, but when you're hearing this, I'll be in Albuquerque for the SAAs, so come check me out at the WildNote booth there if you're hearing this in real time. If you're not, well, see me at the next conference. Anyway, talking about WildNote, I've been on this project. I came down here as WildNote tech support, but I'm also working as a crew chief on their project for 2.5 weeks or so. Long linear survey. We've recorded probably several dozen sites. I don't know, maybe like 50, 60 sites. They've got some more to do. But we've submitted over 200 WildNote forms. Now, that's 200 forms, the California DPR forms, primary forms, ARC forms, photograph records, artifact forms, all those. And guess what, folks? The site records are done, right? You just have to check them a little bit, make sure your numbers are right, make sure sentences are complete, and the site records are finished. Full DPR forms in seconds. So check it out, wildnoteapp.com. Now back to the show.
Hello. It's now Sunday morning on the final day of the Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference. And as I sit out here on my hotel balcony, I'm ready to do one final interview for you. This one will be an interview of myself. So, tell me a little bit about myself. So I'm sort of a latecomer to archaeology. As a child, I was fascinated by things like Indiana Jones, National Geographic magazine, the National Geographic specials that would be on public television. So I had this bug. So when college came about, I was an anthropology major, and I got to school and found out that archaeology was completely different than I understood. Between that and other things, I ended up dropping out, and for the next 15 years, I mostly spent my time in retail banking until I got an epiphany at one point where I just couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't me. It wasn't in my soul. So I dropped out. This is in about 2007, right before the economic crash. So it was probably a good time to get out of that. And I went back to finish my degree. And ever since then, I've been on the role of mostly working in CRM, with a little specialty sometimes in telecommunications. But that's sort of my road to archaeology. So it was there was a detour on the way, but I make it. So what about my work? What do I do? Right now, I am a field supervisor for a large engineering firm, which basically means I'm the one who helps make sure that the work plan is executed out in the field. So when we have the proposals and we have these workflows and work plans, we make sure I'm the one to make sure that all the holes get dug, that we actually do the test units, that collects the data. I'm also the one who writes a summary of the field report for the final report on that. So mostly that's what I do right now. So why archaeology? And this is an important one for me because as someone who sort of had another sort of life experience, first career, and come back to archaeology, it's the stories, sort of helping help to expand stories that we already know. But just as important, maybe not more important, help explore stories we don't know about people and places. It's always that sort of, you're in the field, you're digging test units in the middle of an abandoned cornfield, expecting nothing, it's been nothing all day, and then all of a sudden, 17th century artifacts come out, and 6 months later, when you have a block there, you realize you run into an ordinary about a half mile outside of this old port town that was serving as a trade route into what was then the frontier interior of the early Maryland colony. So that's always that thrill of discovery. There's nothing quite like that. And it's a thing that keeps driving you back, even when times are bad, when you're just digging negative shovel test for days on end. It's when you find something that's that sort of endorphin rush that gets you moving. So what about anything in CRM that I would like to see changed? There's some high-level stuff like the National Historic Preservation Act could be more in line. Since it's sort of based on the National Register of Historic Places, it was first and foremost sort of with the eye towards architecture, and at times it almost feels like archaeology is an afterthought in that, since really the only thing that triggers archaeology is a potential future knowledge. And I think it's worth looking back at and going, is that the only thing archaeology is useful for, as for its future potential research? But that would be like one of the things that I would like to see change, just sort of a re-examination of that. It's been 50 years. We've done a lot more work since then. I think we can do something better. And what makes me hopeful about the future of archaeology? One, being at this conference and seeing all these students out here and sort of their enthusiasm and all the questions they're asking that I'm not even thinking about. They're sort of diving into the use of technologies so naturally and comfortably, where I enjoy technology. I like the application of technology in there, but it's not always natural for me. But for these students I'm seeing up here, it's second nature. It's just things they've grown up with. And also being so entrenched in basically being plugged in and computerized for their entire lives, they think about things in sort of that manner as well. So that is definitely something that makes me hopeful about the future. So what makes Middle Atlantic archaeology unique? For me, and this is why I wanted to do the final interview with myself, because the Middle Atlantic is my passion. It's where I grew up. I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C. I spent most of my life in this area. So this is, sort of very personal to me. I enjoy that within this sort of range between Virginia and New York, you have such a diversity of landscapes and peoples and stories. You have the Atlantic coast. You have the Chesapeake Bay, which is its own unique, wonderful, estuary of sorts. It's capped in by the Appalachians on the west, and you have in each of those regions you have such a different story, both in pre-contact and in once European colonization occurs, and even into the growth of the United States. These areas are unique, and then sort of their cultural signatures. I enjoy being in a region where we can examine the hard stuff, like examine slavery from its origins within the United States. This year is the 400th anniversary of Jamestown's 1619 of the first arrivals of Africans into the colony. Now, I know Spanish America had it maybe a few years earlier in southern there, but within this region, this is sort of the early stages of what becomes first the British colonies' version of chattel slavery, and then eventually gets inherited over by the United States. So having all of those types of things happening here in this one place is a privilege to be able to work in this area. Now, all that being said, to me the Middle Atlantic is a special little snowflake. I understand that every region is like this. Every region has its uniqueness and its story to tell, and it's one of the reasons I was interested in recording these interviews over the course of this weekend, because it's really the regional conferences that I'm sort of plugging right now. In general, anywhere, any local archaeology conference you can go to, because the stories that are told there are typically may not always be the ones that make it to the national conferences, because there's so many material going on there. Additionally, this is also, if you're working in a region, where you're going to make your networking and your contacts and so forth. To me, at this point now that I've been coming to this conference now for about 8 years, it's almost like a reunion. It's people I haven't seen in a year, old colleagues, old friends. And that's important. You build those things over time. So if you're a new tech, go to your regional conferences. That's how you build your network. That's how you sort of are going to take your next step in your career, by making those connections with people. So I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to all these interviews over the course of the weekend and maybe has a little better understanding of what is the Middle Atlantic and the kind of archaeology we do out here. And hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.